Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is another discussion format video. Today we had the topic that a lot of fans are going to have a lot of different opinions on, and that is the status of Dooku's redemption. What would that look like? Is it even possible, being the big one? Why did Dooku turn? What were his motivations? Were they truly righteous? There's a misunderstanding in the fan base a lot of the time, and a major debate on if Dooku truly turned for righteous reasons. We have a ton of videos on the channel dedicated to Dooku's ideology and the reasons behind why he does what he does, why he supports the separatist movement, how he moves against the Jedi Council, but also at the same time how he holds a genuine, better, brighter future for the galaxy that he wants to pursue. But at the same time, if you look across the channel and throughout the lore, you'll see atrocities that Dooku commits, and sometimes atrocities that he commits with a smile on his face. So I'm again joined with the Archivist today.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks so much for having me again.
And we're going to analyze Dooku. Is it possible for him to be redeemed specifically? Why did he turn to the dark side? How could the Jedi go about redeeming him? And in the end, would he be receptive of this redemption? So, as I stated, I think the most important thing we have to talk about is, why did Dooku turn to the dark side in the first place? And I'll give a really brief overview, and then I'll turn it over to you, and you can add any little lore bits and look deeper into his ideology and see the reasons for his return. One of the most famous quotes in the whole world is, the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. No character embodies that better than Dooku when he pays lip service to why he turned. When we get behind the true reasons why he turned, things get a little muckier. But if you were to ask Dooku, if you were to sit down in a room with him and ask him why the Sith were superior, and you were a Jedi, he would probably go along the lines of, the galaxy has become so corrupted, specifically the Senate and the Republic, that it requires a more powerful force to achieve balance and unity in the galaxy and the Republic itself. And that unity is one force more powerful than any citizen, more powerful than any senator and any chancellor, and that would be the Galactic Empire. Dooku, like Palpatine, believes that his answer is the right answer. And while Dooku does ultimately want peace, he is willing to achieve peace through bloodshed, and any form of bloodshed whatsoever. He absolutely despises the corruption in the Senate. In my video where I covered Mace Windu's sort of regrets about killing Jango Fett, I said, and I theorized, that Mace was likely able to connect with Dooku in that moment so efficiently because he sees a lot of himself in Dooku. The Revenge of the Sith novel goes a ton out of its way to explain that Mace Windu's true love is the Republic and the Jedi. Wow. And I think that Dooku's pure love is, in a way, what the Separatists stand for, and order and peace. Now, how he wants to go about that is completely incorrect. Dooku believes that he is the most powerful and capable man to lead the galaxy into a new, bigger, brighter frontier without corruption. But in order to achieve that state of no corruption in your government, he believes that he should be the sole government, him and his master. And while he raises a lot of brilliant points about the Jedi becoming weaker and the Jedi becoming lapdogs to the Senate, all things that are true, how he decides to go about remedying that is ultimately flawed, and it's through violence and treachery and murder. So that's a brief overview. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. What do you think Dooku's ideology is? Why did he turn, nailed down to his very core?
Well, when you look at Dooku whenever he was a Jedi, especially the way that Qui-Gon remembers him and the way he talks about him in Master and Apprentice, Dooku was a guy who actually did care about the state of the Force. He was really in tune with the Jedi mystics, and he was known for having a fascination with prophecies and the holocron of prophecies that resided in the Jedi archives. The Master and Apprentice recounts a time when Qui-Gon had a similar fascination to where he would constantly check out the holocron of prophecies and study it in his, I guess whatever the Jedi call their dormitories, And Dooku came in on him studying it one time, and the two of them found common ground and started to actually relate to one another over, debating and talking about and theorizing on all the prophecies of the Jedi. So he did care about the state of the galaxy, and that was a part of him that is what led him to wanting to take over his family's estate on Sereno. He fell originally, well, not fell, he left the Order originally because he was upset over what Count Ramil had done to his home of Sereno, and because he was the only male heir left of his family, he felt this sense of duty to use his family's name to rebuild Sereno after what his brother had done, after what his family had done to it. But we know that Sidious had been planting the seeds before then and placating to Dooku's frustration over the way the Jedi not only disregard prophecies, but allow corruption to continue in the Republic. You touched on this a second ago, talking about all the corruption in the Senate. And Dooku was a Jedi politician. Like, he was one of those people where, even though he was trained as a guardian, diplomacy was one of his main, was one of the main things that he did. So it came as no surprise to people that when he left the Jedi Order, he went to take up his family's name and become that diplomat full time. But of course, his fall to the dark side does come as a surprise, considering that he was a man who deeply cared about the state of the galaxy.
He did. And he eventually did join Sereno to gain political power in the galaxy itself. He gained political power through the Separatists because he sort of realized that although it was his goal to remake the galaxy from within the Republic, that it was already being remade within the Republic. He just had a larger role to play. He sort of knew that his master had it covered. But going back to the Jedi, I mean, Dooku fundamentally disagreed with like a lot of what was happening with the Order. He thought that they had become weak duelists. He thought that they lacked a lot of discipline, and that not only were they shown to be subservient to the Senate, but unable to protect themselves on a much deeper level. And that is why when he became a Sith Lord, that's a point that he was able to prove, is that he had mastered a dueling form when it was very controversial to do so in the era of the Jedi, and because he had specialized in that, essentially no Jedi could touch him, which is always very interesting. But a big part that we need to look at that we have not touched on for one of his reasons for turning to the dark side, a reason that he shares with Anakin, is that from his very birth, Dooku has always wanted power. And that is as big a reason for his turn as, wanting to topple the Senate. It's a less glamorous reason, which is why he addresses it, not as much at first, but as he gains more, even the way he talks to Yoda, the way he talks to Anakin and ObiWan, it's very clear that the power that he gets is very important to him. And the more he gets, the more important it becomes.
That was something that he always struggled with since he was a youngling. Jedi Lost, whenever he's recounting the story of his youth to Ventress, he talks about how he knew that he was better than the other younglings, and he knew that they knew, which is why they bullied him. Despite not knowing his family on Sereno, he still knew that he was of noble birth and continued to act like it, even though he was not raised in that environment, which I've always found fascinating. Because it was like nobility was in his blood, and he always kept his robes and his shoes pristine. His living spaces were completely in order. He spoke with a very, what do you call it? Distinct dialect and pristine dialect, I guess you'd say. And he applied himself really hard to all his studies and gained more power and prestige as a Jedi. And he actually enjoyed being better than other people.
Yeah, I mean, he's the proto Anakin in a lot of ways, which is why they hate each other so much, because they see their own weakness, and it's a mirror for the other person.
Oh man, there's an entire discussion to be had just right there.
Yeah, but that's why is Anakin in Attack of the Clones, and we have a video that we're going to release talking about this. He is under the impression that he is a better duelist than even Yoda. And when he eventually does duel Dooku, you guys have all seen it, that opinion changes. Enough said. But
yeah.
But now that we've addressed, sort of why Dooku has turned and a lot of the evil things that he's done, they don't really have to be gone into detail. Like Dooku will sacrifice the lives of billions if it furthers his cause, whatsoever. He doesn't care about the clones. Mm-hmm. Most Jedi view the clones and they sense them through the Force as real people with emotions and things to contribute. Dooku views them as droids, as fodder. They are lesser than him. Not only that, but he views those that are less powerful than him as lesser than he is, and those that are less enlightened. But with all of that said, in contrast to Sidious, Dooku does have redeeming qualities. And we have a few laid out. I'll go ahead and let you talk about Yoda Dark Rendezvous and one of the best Yoda and Dooku moments in all of the lore, and how in that book Dooku's ideology is challenged by Yoda.
Oh man, I love that moment. So in that book, there's a lot going on at the time, and they're on the planet of Vijun, or I don't know how you pronounce that planet, but Yoda ends up visiting Dooku in his castle, and before the two have a duel, like Dooku posts up and he's ready to fight, but Yoda doesn't fight him this time. There's no one whose lives is at stake at the moment, and all he wants to do is talk. And so the two have a long conversation where they're just going back and forth, debating about the light versus the dark. And of course, Dooku doesn't respect Yoda's position talking about the light. He's like, you're just lecturing and repeating the same Jedi doctrine over and over again, the same doctrine that failed me, and is currently failing the galaxy. If you would just embrace the dark side, you would see why it is the way to save the people you love and to establish order and to have everything you could ever want. And Yoda actually decides to oblige him in this moment and deciding to actually meet Dooku on his level, because he knows that Dooku is not going to respect him and he's not going to listen to anything he has to say until he shows him that the dark side is not the only way. So we talk about this moment a lot, that sort of Yoda gone rotten moment where he decides to accept the dark side, kind of curious almost to see why so many people, so many of his loved ones and friends have fallen to it. And Dooku describes seeing him as being worse than Sidious. Like his face is just, he's just like a monster, a creature. And Dooku realizes that if Yoda were to ever embrace the dark side, that he would become something so terrifying that not even Sidious could contain him. And then Yoda pulls back. And he's like, the dark side's not for me. And it's like in that moment, not only does he sort of flex his power over Dooku in both sides of the Force, but he finishes it off by saying, like, I don't want to kill you. I don't want to destroy you. And I want you to come home. So this is really early in the Clone Wars. This is very shortly following after Geonosis. Dooku has not yet committed all of the atrocities that he would. So at this moment, there's a chance, right? And Yoda kind of meets him there and is like, almost talking to him like a son. and is like, you can come home at any time and we will accept you and we will forgive you. And for the briefest of glimpses, just for a moment, Dooku is so tempted, but then Anakin and Obi-Wan, like, he gets an alert and they're there trying to stop whatever plan that he had going on in the novel. And then Dooku immediately pulls back and thinks that Yoda had set him up for a trap. And it was just one of the worst moments there because it was so close.
Dang, that is really profound and unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that Obi-Wan and Anakin showed up at that moment. Because, Anakin, if anybody's going to drive Dooku away from the light side, it's going to be Anakin. The arrogance that he has just drives him crazy.
Ironic, though.
Yeah, but it's funny. Not funny at all. Funny's the wrong word. It's tragic to see Yoda's opinion change for Dooku as the Clone Wars goes on. In Dark Rendezvous, as you mentioned, it's early and he's willing to redeem him. But by the end, they're willing to send, Jedi to assassinate him. And Yoda...
by Dark Disciple, Yoda condones sending Voss to assassinate him.
Yeah. And it's that transformation. It's Dooku's continual fall and spiral that Yoda, he's gone. One of the moments that I think is kind of sad is that when Yoda hears about Dooku's death, he sort of just brushes it off because in his mind, it's never explicitly said anywhere, but I think we can take context clues. In Yoda's mind, his friend died forever ago. Same with, Obi-Wan and Anakin in A New Hope.
It's that resolve. Yeah, it's that resolve that he had whenever Obi-Wan looked into the security tapes, and then after it was done, Yoda just simply says, "Destroy the Sith, we must." And the way he says it with such finality is like, in that moment, you saw the pain on his face, but it wasn't for Anakin so much as it was for Obi-Wan having to see it. And his resolve was absolute right then. He's like, all right, Anakin Skywalker's dead, so we've got to destroy this Lord Vader that's now exists. And I think the exact same actually, is said for Count Dooku and Darth Tyrannus.
Yeah. But that's not the only redeeming quality of Dooku. Speaking of Obi-Wan, always had a soft spot for Obi-Wan, and you have a point in the outline that you put together that I would love for you to expound upon, and that's that love normally makes the dark side weaker, but Dooku seems to love Obi-Wan as a grandson, and it doesn't really diminish his power. Can you talk about that for a sec?
It's kind of interesting because this is one of those things that we have picked up on, but that neither canon nor Legends has explicitly stated anywhere, so everything that we say from here on out is mostly speculation. But with the evidence that we're given, it's not far-fetched at all. Dooku really does care for Obi-Wan. It says Obi-Wan is sort of that last remnant of Qui-Gon Jinn, the last person that Dooku had a really tight connection to, and in some continuities is the reason he actually fell to the dark side. Obi-Wan always symbolized this sort of continuation of Qui-Gon's legacy. And I know that there was a part of Dooku that really wanted to turn Obi-Wan to the dark side, or at least bring him over to his side. I mean, we saw that in Attack of the Clones. And even Dooku in Attack of the Clones, speaking of which, that conversation, he says something in there that I find interesting. He mentions that he misses Qui-Gon and he really wishes he could get his wisdom right then. And that makes me feel like that Dooku feels kind of lost without his confidant. The one person in the Jedi Order who at least somewhat held his views and kind of agreed with him on most things. And so he was like, I really wish I could get his input because now things are getting really sketchy with Darth Sidious and with the Separatists. And he's like, Dooku was always wanting to overthrow Sidious. And if he was going to do it with anyone, I know for a fact he would have loved to do it with Obi-Wan. And I think it was that hope that he could bring Obi-Wan into the fold that didn't diminish his power. And when it came down to the wire, when Sidious was like, enough is enough, whenever we're dueling Anakin on the invisible hand, I want you to kill Obi-Wan in front of him. Dooku can't do it. And at this point, he's steeped into the dark side. This is after Quinlan Vos, after the attempted Jedi assassination. He should be, like, long gone by now. But what, for me, holds out hope that Dooku could still be redeemed is the fact that when he had an opening, instead of killing Obi-Wan, he could have ran him through, but he force-pushed him away and just engaged with Anakin. And we can even see Palpatine's reaction when he does this. Like, the camera flits over to Palpatine's face, and he looks like he breaks his Palpatine facade for a moment and is irritated. And
yeah,
so
a lot of people have interpreted that as like, ouch, but Palpatine doesn't go ouch for others.
No, he doesn't.
He's just disappointed.
Yeah, because the thing about it is that he winces when he sees Obi-Wan go down, but then his eyes look back at Dooku, and it's a mixture of, like, confusion and, like, a, what are you doing? You just literally disobeyed me in front of me.
Yeah, and hatred.
Oh, yeah. And so, you know, we talk, there's this running theme in a lot of Star Wars stories with love being the counter to the dark side. It was what brought Vader back, and it was what brought Bastila back from the dark side. And of course, we can look to the Vader one as being more of like a familial love. I feel like most people think that it's only more like a romantic love of one's partner that could possibly bring one back. But it's honestly, we've seen it's any kind of love, any kind of true, absolute love.
That Dooku has for Obi-Wan. In that last moment, he decides not to kill him against Palpatine's wishes. Dooku is begging Palpatine moments earlier, you know, maybe we can train Obi-Wan too. Maybe we can turn him. I believe I can get to him. And it's just this unwillingness to give up on his grandson, the last glimmer of Qui-Gon Jinn. You know, Dooku has sacrificed his own morals as a Jedi, and he has driven out the pieces of Qui-Gon out of himself. But there's still Obi-Wan, and because there's still Obi-Wan, there is still Qui-Gon. But the second that that's all over, Qui-Gon, as far as Dooku is concerned, is truly dead. It would be like Dooku running Qui-Gon through with his lightsaber.
Honestly, yeah. Honestly, it's like, and it's kind of hilarious because in that moment he's arguing with Sidious, being like, he doesn't want Anakin to join in the fold. He really doesn't. He wants to kill Anakin. He thinks less of him because he has a cybernetic arm. And he's at that point, I think he's honestly just trying to find reasons to nitpick with Anakin. He really cares about Obi-Wan being in there. And I'd love to think that there was a deeper reason that, like, maybe he sort of subconsciously blames Anakin for the death of Qui-Gon, since Qui-Gon engaged with Darth Maul to protect the boy in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's completely possible. There's no soft moment ever shared between Anakin and Dooku. Just nothing whatsoever, which I think is important because they are the truest of rivals. Even if you look at Maul's final moment, he has a soft moment with Obi-Wan, but Dooku and Anakin, just the most bitter of rivals.
To the very
nothing
end.
Compares. To the very end. Anakin gives into the dark side. Go ahead, man. Sorry.
No, my bad. I said, I was about to say, they were such strong rivals that the moment that Anakin actually defeated Count Dooku, he was so stunned that Anakin had done this, he couldn't bring himself to words. And of course, that's actually in the Revenge of the Sith script right there. He was so stunned, that's why he didn't say anything.
Yep. And I think Dooku knows that he's not going to be spared.
You're right, yeah.
I think Dooku looks at Anakin, and Anakin is, they meet eyes for a second, and, Anakin even turns away in Revenge of the Sith, if you remember. And I think Anakin is turning away because he doesn't want to feel sorry for Dooku. In his heart, he doesn't want to. because the reasons for him not killing Dooku aren't he can be changed, or he was once a great Jedi, or we can learn a lot for him. His reasons for not killing him are it's against the Jedi code and I'm still a Jedi. It has nothing to do with the man. It has everything to do with Anakin's firm moral code and nothing to do with sympathy. So.
Oh, man, that's crazy.
But let's go ahead and move on. What do you think would require Dooku's redemption? You know, they were unable to drive love away from him completely. Palpatine, and by they I mean Palpatine. Palpatine was unable to drive his love for ObiWan and Qui-Gon out of Dooku completely. So is it possible that if Dooku survived, let's say hypothetically, you know, Anakin does spare him, what do the Jedi do to turn him back, or at least let him see the error of his ways?
Oh man, this is one of those where it's like, could he be redeemed? My official answer is a fat, resounding maybe. Because by the time of Revenge of the Sith, Dooku has done so much crap and he's steeped so far into the dark side. Like, from what we understand, he's engaged with Sith artifacts and he's been doing like Sith sorcery, and like that's, historically speaking, like the point of no return, right? Most Sith sorcerers are just so steep into the dark side, they just have nothing left in them, no light whatsoever. So, but of course, with this glimmer of hope with Obi-Wan, that's how we're even able to have this conversation. I think it's from that. It would require heavy amounts of rehab and lots of time with Yoda. I think it would be a combination of that, and in my opinion, Dooku would have to prove it to the Jedi, which means like revealing a lot of secrets about the Separatists and the Sith. You know, stuff I think like he would have to tell them about Order 66 and like the microchips in the clones. He'd have to reveal who Darth Sidious is, assuming that, I think, does Dooku know that Palpatine is Darth Sidious?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, I thought so. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he knew about the plans of the Death Star, so he'd have to tell them that.
That's the whole reason that Dooku turns. Is after he's hunting down, the killer of Qui-Gon Jinn in Legends, it leads him directly to Sidious, and Sidious essentially senses that Dooku is hot on his trails, and decides to reveal himself completely. And it's that moment where Dooku realizes that the corruption has gone so far that the Chancellor is a Sith.
That's sick. And at that point, he realized that the best way to defeat the corruption is to guide the corruption. Yeah.
Tear it all down. So, yes, he does know. And in fact, that in Legends continuity is and maybe in canon, we don't know for sure. But that is the moment that he decides.
I think one of the biggest things is that if he were to get into some Jedi rehab, Yoda, he originally did turn to the dark side, as we said, for righteous reasons. And I think that Yoda would have to be the one, I think a joint effort with Yoda and Obi-Wan to show Count Dooku just how far he had fallen away from his original reasons for turning. And, kind of put a mirror to his actions and be like, I know you thought this was necessary, but you need to see that you have destroyed everything that you believed in.
Yeah. And one of the big differences between someone like Vader and Dooku is that Dooku is the same person, Jedi to Sith. Vader tries to kill the identity of Anakin. So that's how Luke is able to appeal to Anakin to come back. But previously, people that weren't in Vader's life, like Obi-Wan and Yoda, those are Anakin's attachments, and that's why Vader has no love for them. But it's not the same for Dooku. Dooku and
No.
and Darth Tyrannus are still the same person. They still operate in much the same way, and because of that, those past attachments, by him going by Dooku for political power or otherwise, those attachments are still there. But I wanted to say, this is off track. The biggest thing with Dooku that they changed for canon was in Legends, Dooku leaves the Jedi when Qui-Gon dies because he's frustrated that the council, that Qui-Gon went to the council and that they still told him that they weren't going to help him on Naboo. But in canon, he has sort of already affiliated with the Sith Lord before Qui-Gon Jinn's death. And as we saw in Tales of the Jedi, when he goes to Sidious to question about his apprentice's death, Palpatine raises the same point that it was the Jedi's decision, and that if they had made the right decision, Qui-Gon would still be here. And Dooku accepts that because Dooku is a big picture guy. He lets go of the small stuff. He's completely focused on the big picture. And that is why I don't think that Dooku would ever be fully redeemed. Obviously,
yeah, that's true.
I mean, I'm not saying that you're wrong for you thinking that he could be, because he's obviously not as far gone as somebody like Sidious or even like Nihilus, Traya, Vitiate on the extreme. There are levels to this. Malgus, there are levels, but just because he's not as dedicated as a Sith and a dark side wielder and corrupted as fully by the dark side as them doesn't mean that he's far enough back on the spectrum that he can be redeemed. And I think that Dooku turned for righteous reasons, partially. He also turned because of a lust for power and an idea of superiority. And he has always had that, as you said, as a Padawan. But despite being taken from his family, he still always thought he knew better, and he loves and he respects Yoda, but he still ultimately thinks of him as a fool. And I think maybe he could be redeemed, but I see no scenario where he becomes a Jedi ever again.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you on that point. The issue with Dooku at this point is that the way we actually see him in the Clone Wars and in the comics is it's not just that he's a Sith, and it's not just that he's doing these things, whether righteous or unrighteous, in reason. He inflicts pain and cruelty, and he enjoys it. He gets to a point to where he's actually sadistic, and that's something that's really highlighted in his relationship with Ventress. Is that, at this point, he is a cruel, abusive person who has started a trend of torturing people. And even in the Dark Disciple novel, whenever she's visiting his dungeons on the castle in Sereno, she talks about how there's a lot of quote-unquote interrogation happening there, but rarely were people really asked any questions. It was just torture for torture's sake. And that's one of those points that is just okay, if he were to be redeemed, he would most likely either, one, be locked up for the rest of his life, which is probably the most likely scenario.
And the most lenient.
And the most lenient, yeah, assuming they don't just decide to execute him. But if he were to somehow turncoat all the way back to the light side, he most certainly would never become a Jedi again. And they would mostly, I think the absolute best case scenario would be they would put him under a sort of house arrest on Sereno, so he could still rule his planet, but he wouldn't be allowed to leave or really have much communication off that planet. And that would be if he'd be willing to help them track down the Dark Lord of the Sith.
So with that, and talking about his house arrest and his views, a big reason why I think that he wouldn't turn was because of his views on the Force itself.
That's true.
He believed that one of the most fascinating points is that Dooku says he believes in balance, but he believes the light has been in control for too long, and he thinks it's arrogant for the Jedi to think that balance couldn't possibly exist with the dark side on top because the light has been on top for so long. And he views himself as the bringer of that balance through the dark side. And that is his argument. Is his view on the Force is that it's the dark side's turn.
I don't think that he would ever ally with the Jedi again at all, mostly because of that view and because of the fact that we know he wanted to essentially build his own Jedi Order. He thought Yoda was an old fool, that he had been in power for way too long, and that was the agreement that he and Sidious had. He was like, Sidious is going to rule, Dooku is going to be the enforcer. Like, he was supposed to be the Vader, essentially. And he was going to make a Jedi Order of his own, and one of his first disciples was going to be Anakin. That was all laid out in their private conversation on the Invisible Hand. And Dooku was kind of unhappy taking on Anakin as an apprentice, but it just kind of was what it was.
He's unhappy because it's made clear to him that Anakin will be his equal eventually.
Yeah.
And that does not sit well with Dooku. But now that that's addressed, let's sort of talk about, unforgivable crimes. The torture and the turning of Quinlan Vos is one that you noted. The killing of the Jedi on Geonosis. The death of Yaddle. And then you wrote down the ordering of assassination of key political figures. The genocide of the Night Sisters, which I think is a big one.
It is a big one.
Trained Grievous, therefore, somewhat responsible for everything that he did, his atrocities. And then you wrote betrayed and murdered Sifo Dyas, an act he did as a Jedi.
Oh man. Yeah, that was the big one that I'm like kind of fuzzy on if he could be redeemed, because he was willing to do that as a Jedi, and like those two in Jedi Lost were really close.
His best friend, no doubt.
Yeah.
Besides Qui-Gon.
Mm-hmm.
But Sifo Dyas was his friend, and Sifo Dyas was the casualty of Dooku's own arrogance.
Sifo Dyas is a big one. In that, when we, in the Plagueis novel, we're actually first introduced to Sifo Dyas whenever he was still a Jedi. I think that's actually one of the only times we get to see Sifo Dyas outside of Jedi Lost, is whenever Plagueis first met Dooku, it was Sifo Dyas on his left and Qui-Gon on his right, and those three were really close.
His best friend and his son.
Yeah.
Essentially. And then you also wrote, and you mentioned this earlier, his fascination with Sith artifacts and sorcery, which began as a Jedi, and you noted historically is the point of no return.
Right.
People like Exar Kun, who else is super notable as a Jedi that delved into that?
Oh, Freedon Nad.
Freedon Nad, yep.
Let me think. As a Jedi... it's kind of interesting. The artifact side of the Sith, where you start like going really deep into Sith lore, it's kind of funny. The Sith kind of gatekeep that, and they usually only let the darkest of the Dark Lords have access to those sorts of things,
unless you're XR, who who that took a toll on him immediately and made him into like. Essentially the worst Sith that they had seen in hundreds of years, potentially of all time.
Exar ended up becoming like the embodiment of evil, and even the most diehard Sith in the future still regarded Exar Kun as one of the finest Sith Lords that ever lived.
Yeah. But I think I've said pretty much everything I want to. I'm going to stand by what I said and say that I think Dooku's redemption would be highly unlikely. Maybe it's possible, but his reasons for turning, while truthful that the Republic is arrogant and corrupt, he also turned because he views himself as destined to be the ultimate force in the galaxy, and his idea of that beings are called to be lesser than him due to his noble blood, due to his intellect, due to his power. And I don't think that those things can be broken in him. I just don't. They've been with him his entire life.
Yeah, and I think my closing statement would probably be something along the lines of, if he were to have a chance at redemption, not only is it a huge maybe that he would probably just pretend to be in the light so long until he got his freedom, there's like a huge possibility of betrayal there. I think the entire thing hinges on the defeat of Darth Sidious and probably the collapse of the entire separatist movement. I think he would have to be brought down to square one, and the sheer amount of work that would need to be done in order to ensure his turn back to the light would be so much you'd have to take into account whether or not it's actually worth it.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah, there's just so much you would have to do in order to ensure Dooku's turn to the light that it's just, and even after all of it, it's just a big maybe.
And I don't even think that even after he would be betrayed by Sidious, hypothetically, still,
No.
I still think he would struggle to turn.
Me too. It's not ever said what happens to Jenza after he becomes a Sith, his sister Jenza. But from what I understand, and I haven't read too much into the Dooku Jedi Lost novel, but from what I can tell, she not only doesn't know that much about the Force or the dark side, but doesn't really care. She cares about her home, her family, and her planet. And I think she only cares about what Dooku does so long as it benefits their home. So it's not like she's actively trying to plead with him to return to the light. She doesn't really care.
Because she
There's
doesn't
also that to
understand.
consider. Yeah, she doesn't understand. So without that sort of familial anchoring point, we would have to sit here and debate whether his care for Kenobi is strong enough to turn him back to the light. Because I just don't know.
Yeah, that's the big question. But, I mean, that's our arguments, guys. I'd love to hear what you have to say down in the comments down below. I'm sure that it'll probably be pretty split. I think a lot of people will realize that Dooku has a lot of fair points about the Republic, and that it should be toppled. But again, it's just the way that he went about the toppling of it that was so wrong, and how he was willing to murder whoever he needed to in order to get it done.
I'll be surprised to see the comments under this one, because Dooku is a very surprisingly contentious figure within the fandom. A lot of people have strong opinions about him.
Yeah, but I have always found Dooku to be one of the best well-written characters in all of Star Wars, and is a testament.
Underrated.
Yeah, underrated. It's a testament to the expanded lore, be it comics and books, because he is this goldmine character that you only really get to understand how incredible he is and how interesting he is if you're willing to, look into things that most people aren't. And that's why he's always been one of my favorite too.
Nice.
Anyway, guys, please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Is Dooku redeemable? I'm saying maybe not, leaning towards no. And the Archivist is uncertain, but deems it a possibility. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and please request more discussion topics down below. We love doing them, and we want to make more. But anyway, guys, may the Force be with you, and have a good day.
See you next time.